Good morning, everybody. It's Friday, and welcome to Penn Vicarage. Lovely to see you. Thank you very much for joining us today for our Bible talk. By the way, don't forget to share these messages with your friends. To click the share button at the bottom, and your friends can see them as well. May I remind you, it's Friday, which means it's the end of the weekend, and we've got loads of exciting services going on in our church this weekend, and you'd be very, very welcome to join us. We'd be a better church if you were there, either physically or the 10 o'clock service at St Bart's or the 11:45 at St Anne's or online. Either way, you'd be very, very welcome. And as I say, we'd be a better church if you were there. So you'd be very welcome. To our reading for today, we are working our way through the Gospel of Matthew. And remind you of the context, Jesus has just done his famous Sermon on the Mount. He's 3 chapters, 5, 6, 7 of that. He's come down from the mountain, he's healed various people, quite a lot of people actually. And then a bit of a crowd gets going. So he and his disciples get into the boat across the Sea of Galilee. And the journey across the sea becomes, shall we say, somewhat exciting. And you find out about it this morning. Here we go, Matthew chapter 8, starting to read at verse 23. And when Jesus got into the boat, his disciples followed him. A windstorm arose on the sea, so great that the boat was being swamped by the waves, but he was asleep. And they went and woke him up, saying, "Lord, save us, we are perishing." And he said to them, "Why are you afraid, you of little faith?" And he got up, rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a dead calm. They were amazed, saying, "What sort of man is this, that even the winds and the sea obey him?" When he came to the other side, to the country of the Gadarenes, 2 demoniacs coming out of the tombs met him. They were so fierce that no one could pass that way. Suddenly they shouted, "What have you to do with us, Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before the time?" Now a large herd of swine was feeding at some distance from them. The demons begged him, "If you cast us out, send us into the herd of swine." And he said to them, "Go." So they came out and entered the swine, and suddenly the whole herd rushed down the steep bank into the sea and perished in the water. The swineherds ran off, and on going into the town, they told the whole story about what had happened to the demoniacs. And the whole town came to meet Jesus. And when they saw him, they begged him to leave their neighborhood. And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Exciting times. A few things to say about this morning. First, in here we have 2 basic incidents, haven't we? Firstly, we've got the story of Jesus and his disciples. They've got into the boat, they're halfway across the sea, and this almighty storm comes along. And the language used is quite extreme. The word for storm literally is a seismos. It's the same word you'd use for an earthquake. So we are talking about an almighty violent storm, okay, which becomes later a dead calm. Jesus finds a chaotic situation and he makes it calm. And they get to the other side, if that wasn't enough, and they meet these 2 demon-possessed men, and then Jesus casts the demons out of them, and the demons go into the pigs, and the pigs, I think it's Mark says there were 2,000 pigs ran into the sea. Now this is odd, because Jesus again bringing order out of these people were out of control, and he brings order to their lives. So he brings order. They were out of control on the boat, and Jesus brings order on that. And these 2 men were out of control because they were demon possessed, and he brings control to them. A quick word, if I may, about the pigs. It reads oddly to us these days because we live in a world today, rightly, of animal rights and so on. Quite right too. But you have to remember, in those days, pigs were considered to be an unclean animal, and they were not considered in quite the same way in Matthew's Gospel. It reads very differently today because we hear it through the lens of animal welfare. In those days, swine were thought of rather differently. So that's just a bit of context for that. Why did he do it? I think in order to make it clear that the demons really had left the person. So in the same way it went from chaos, the storm, to calm on the water, now you're going from chaotic, poor old men, demon-possessed, then demonstrating very clearly that the demons had come out of the man. That's why he did that. Now, there are lots of things we could say about this, but I want to say 2 in particular this morning. The first thing is about faith. And we all know this, I'm sure we know these stories very well. So they're on the boat, and the storm is crashing around them, and they get scared, so they wake up Jesus. And Jesus kind of berates them, really, for their lack of faith. Now, this is quite interesting, really, because actually, in some ways, they'd shown faith. Think about it. Because, firstly, they got into the boat to follow Jesus, so they had you might say, decided to follow Jesus, so they'd put their faith in him like that. Also, when times got scary and disturbing, they were frightened, they turned to Jesus. Again, they'd showed faith. So why was Jesus berating them for their lack of faith? As I said, they'd shown faith in following him. They'd shown faith in waking them up when they got into trouble. Where had they gone wrong? Well, because they were scared, while they had faith in him to follow him, they had faith in him when times got difficult, they didn't kind of have faith in him that he'd somehow got the situation. They were kind of, they had enough faith in him to follow him, faith in him to turn to him when times was difficult, but they didn't have enough faith in him to know that he kind of knew what he was doing. And I think we all have times in our lives, don't we, when we can get into stormy waters in our lives. Okay, we're following Jesus, we're doing all sorts of things, and times get stormy, and it can feel a bit like Jesus is asleep in the boat. You know, it feels like he's oblivious to everything. And actually, I think this reminds us to try and have faith that God knows what he's doing. And it's hard sometimes because we don't always think that God knows what he's doing. But actually what this says is that Jesus does know what he's doing. He had the disciples in his hands. He had the situation in control. That's just why he was asleep. Okay, he was so in control. He knew that. And I think there's a reminder to us here about our faith. You know, we can have faith to follow him. Quite right. We're following Jesus. We're living Christian lives. We can have faith to turn to him when times get difficult. But let's kind of learn the lesson this morning to try and, if we can, to have faith that somehow he knows what he's doing. And that somehow when we get into situations when life seems out of control and somehow it feels all mad and, what's going on here? And it can feel as though Jesus is asleep and oblivious and, and so on. We kind of know he's there, but he seems asleep and seems to be doing nothing about it. Let's try, if we can, to have faith that somehow God's got it, that God knows what he's doing, that Jesus is with us, that he does love us, and that we can put our faith in him. Not only enough just to follow him, not only enough to turn to him when life gets difficult, but to trust him that he's in command and he knows what he's doing in our lives and in the life of our church. For that reason, we do not need to be afraid. What does God say more than anything else in the Bible? Do not be afraid, and we don't need to be. That's the one thing. The other thing, which Matthew is very clear about this, is Jesus does two amazing things. Like I said, he changes the weather. The weather goes from this earthquake-type storm to this dead calm. And he gets to the shore, and these two demon-possessed men who for some awful out-of-control situation, and to demonstrate, as I say, that they're free of this, the pigs go into the water to make the point. In both cases, Jesus is demonstrating that he has the power. He has the power to bring order out of chaos in nature, and he has power to bring order out of chaos in spiritual world as well. He has power over demons, the things that get control and take people out of control in their lives. In other words, he's got the power. And actually, he's more than that. He hasn't just got the power. He's actually doing things here which only God can do. In the Old Testament, in the book of Genesis, God brought order out of chaos in creation. In the book of Jonah, God has control over the weather. In the Psalms, God has control over the weather. And anyone reading this, especially in the New Testament times, will have known that for anyone to have order, have power over the weather, is doing something that only God can do. In other words, Jesus is doing something only God can do, pointing to the fact that Jesus is divine. And likewise with the demons. Who else has power over demons in quite this way to bring such order out of such chaos? Only God can do that kind of thing. And what these two readings, what these two amazing incidents are pointing to is that Jesus is more than just a good bloke. He's so much more than just a good teacher. He's so much more than just a mighty worker. He's so much more than just a smashing guy. This is actually pointing, by doing things that only God can do, he's demonstrating that he is God. And Matthew wants to see that he is God. So there's a lot in this morning's reading. These two incidents, the stilling of the storm and the healing of the two Gadarene demoniacs, okay? And I think the first thing we can learn, as I say, is that is about our faith. Is that we can have faith to follow Jesus. We can have faith to turn to Jesus when lives get difficult. But let's ask God today for the faith to know in our hearts that he's got it. even though it feels sometimes madly out of control, and it sometimes feels as though he's asleep. Let's actually put our faith in him, that he knows what he's doing. And secondly, let's see the message that Matthew wants us to see, that in doing such things which only God can do, he's demonstrating the fact that Jesus is more than a good bloke, more than a good teacher, more than just a prophet. He's God himself. More on Monday. Do join us for Service over the weekend. God bless you. As I say, do share these messages